This is the detailed presentation of the data collected from the Worthington Alliance for Responsible Development, aka WARD, the survey that was conducted in March of 2016. And if you'd rather view the brief version, which is a little less than 10 minutes, you are welcome to do that at wardworthington.org. Before we get started into the data analysis, it's important to understand what the survey actually does and what the goals of the survey are. And the main point is that this is an attitudinal survey, so it gauges the general feelings, and that's the goal, to gauge the general feelings about the topics outlined in the survey, which were based on the WARD's guiding principles. So if you work through the data analysis with that in mind, this is not what we call a behavioral survey or an experimental design survey. Those are very different surveys. But as far as methodologies go and statistically significant outcomes, our survey does fit within those parameters. We worked with Dr. Armstrong from The Ohio State University to create and develop a survey format and the wording of the survey that's consistent with standard research practices. So this is what we'd consider a quasi-experimental design. It is a voluntary sample, so those folks who volunteered to take the survey, they were not forced, they were not incentivized in any way, and those were people who just took it upon themselves to click on the survey link or fill out a paper survey at their own time. And again, this is considered attitudinal, but it's also considered directional because the numbers didn't fall into the random sampling guidelines. So we have to make sure we understand that this is merely directional to gauge general feelings. So if we understand that and understand kind of the methods behind that, some different formats of questioning were included, like a Likert scale, 1 through 7, rate your feelings, that type of thing. Multiple choice, ranking questions, first place, second place, third place, so on. Once we get down to the actual data, we looked at the participants who volunteered to take the survey, and we ended up with 293 valid responses, and we basically didn't include anybody outside of the city of Worthington. There were a handful of participants who ended up being from outside of the city. They were in the school district, but not part of the city, so they were not included in this data. So of the 293 people who were valid responses, we had 80% of the folks who identified the number of people in their household, which came out to be about 700. Well, it came out to be 750 actual people represented by the 293 participants. So an example of that is, I took the survey, and I have 4 people in my household. I identified that, so I would have been tallied in as 4 people in that 750. So I speak for my household. Now, we did have a handful of folks who, there were 2 participants from the same household. They were broken down as just counting for themselves only. Once, if we had 2 people, so if my wife also took the survey, which she didn't, but if my wife also took the survey and I took the survey, then they would just be counted 1 and 1, and would not be counted as a total of 4 and 4 for each household. So if that makes any sense, that's how we ended up with this survey actually represents at least 750 people, and we don't know about the other 20%, so we didn't include them in that representation number. The demographics, as far as geography goes, the demographics do match the geography demographics for the city. So as far as population goes, we do see a good cross-section of the population spread out throughout the geographical city here. So you can see a little uptick there in the Estates area, which was kind of to be expected with the, just the topic of the United Methodist Children's Home topic. And but for the most part, we have a good amount of participation from all over the city. So a good cross-section. Same thing with the demographics for male versus female, which is pretty consistent with the actual demographics for the city, and also with the age. We capture the two largest demographics as far as age goes in the city, which are 65 plus and 35 to 44, which tend to be the young families. And that also is consistent with the age demographic for the city according to the census data. So we get into the questions now, and we ask folks how familiar they are with the Lifestyles Community Plan that was proposed in June of 2015. And we see that most people are either somewhat familiar or very familiar. Very few people are in this category where they hadn't heard of it, or maybe they've heard of it but don't know too much about it. So that makes sense since it's a voluntary opt-in survey. You have those types of folks who probably have been paying a little more attention, have a little more interest in the actual topic. So that does make sense. Same thing with the Worthington Comprehensive Plan. A little less people are somewhat familiar or very familiar with the Worthington Comprehensive Plan, and of course that's a document that's been around for a while, and it was updated in the fall of 2014, specific to the UMCH corridor there. The takeaway with familiarity is that nearly all participants are somewhat familiar or very familiar with the UMCH plan, the Lifestyles Plan, aka LC. And 3/4 of participants are somewhat familiar with, or very familiar with, the comprehensive plan for the city. We see nearly twice as many participants are very familiar with the LC plan versus the comprehensive plan, which makes some sense because probably you can correlate that to it's made more news in the past year or so, or 2 years even. So people are probably paying a little more attention to that. And the participants of this survey, they are highly educated on civic issues. But the interesting thing is, if you go back to the folks who are not at all familiar, or they've maybe heard of the plans, but not too familiar with the plans, their answers throughout the entire survey, if we filter out their answers and only look at their answers compared to those folks who are somewhat familiar or very familiar, you will notice that the ratios and the percentages of the answers throughout the entire survey are consistent with those who are familiar. So what that means, what that tells us, is that the folks who don't know too much about the plans and the folks who do know a lot about the plans, their feelings for all the questions throughout the survey based on that ask about growth and setbacks and height and all those things, the ratios were consistent. So it's a pretty interesting little analysis point that we can look at. It doesn't matter how familiar you are with the plan, answers are going to be mostly consistent throughout. So we get into the next set of questions. Are you planning on moving within Worthington in the next 10 years? And this is a general feedback based on the date they took the survey. So we understand that sometimes things happen in life situations, and 2 years from now you might need to move out of town or whatever, but this is based on, as of the day they took the survey, their general opinions and feelings, and we see that 73% they said no. We see some downsizing options, folks who want a bigger house, and then other. Then we asked them, if so, why? And then in the downsizing and the bigger house and other, a lot of it was, they're going to be empty nesters, or with the bigger house, they're having more kids. Just kind of what you would expect with the marketplace, moving inside of into a different house. if they answered no on the last question, those 70% or so, what best describes the reason for answering no? And we see that, because remember, we asked, are you planning on moving within Worthington? So if they said no, we asked why. Well, 93% of those folks said, well, they just don't plan on moving at all. So they're just going to stay in their house in the next 10 years. And then we see some people who are planning on moving away from Worthington. Regardless, they plan on moving, but they realize that there's no housing in their price range or any housing that meets their needs. So we combine those two in the takeaway slide. We see that the actual percentages then become 68% plan on remaining in their current home at least 10 years. So a lot of people are sticking around, not planning on moving at all outside of their current home. We see that 7.5% plan on moving away from Worthington for whatever reason, and 27% plan to move to a different home within Worthington, and again, that's within Worthington, within 10 years. And 3.5% additional to that would like to move within Worthington, but just don't know if there's going to be housing for them. Another set of questions we have, do you think the city of Worthington should encourage growth? And that's broken down into residential, commercial growth, and then no. You can see that participants can choose more than one option here, so that's why you have 55% and 62% and 25%. That doesn't equal 100%. That's more than 100% because they can choose more than one option. The big takeaway on that is 25% of folks desire no growth, either residential or commercial. We see that 3/4 of the people who chose commercial growth also, 3/4 of the people who chose residential growth also chose commercial growth. And 2/3 of those who chose commercial growth also chose residential growth. So as you can see, these are not equal. More people chose commercial growth than residential growth. And then it asked the reason. The next question was, well, why did you choose that answer or those answers? And you can see some of the big takeaways on the cloud, word cloud here, that the online tool just kind of automatically does. So it's a pretty interesting little tool there. You can see some of the big the big responses based on keywords: growth, community, residential, there's need there, commercial, business. So I took it a step further and analyzed the actual comments, which was qualitative data. And I took that qualitative data, and there were 193 people total who answered, and out of those 193 people who answered and added additional comments, there were actually 222 comments from those 193 people. And based on those keywords, I took the qualitative data and I grouped them into similar keywords or exact matches for those keywords. So you can see that about 13% of the 13% of the 222 comments included something that said development would be too dense, or they're just worried about too much density. About 10% of the folks answered consistently with responsible commercial development, specifically responsible commercial development. And then third place, tied with that, was they desire more commercial development for more tax revenues, because obviously the city gets tax revenues through commercial growth. And then you can see some other keywords there that were consistently used all the way down to 2% of the 222 comments. Anything below 2% I did not include in this slide. So also the stars, a little handy tool that you can take some time and look at. The red stars were indicated as largely folks who answered no to the growth question. The purple stars were those who largely answered yes to commercial. The yellow stars were those who largely answered yes to residential. and the blue were those who